Welcome to this deep dive, and we're going to be looking at Mauro F. Guillen's The Perennials, the
Yay.
Megatrends, creating a post-generational society.
Okay.
And I think one of the things that I found really interesting is this book really challenges how we think about how we structure our lives.
Yeah.
You know, we have this kind of model in our heads, I think a lot of us do, of like play, study, work, retire.
Right.
And this book really kind of pokes some holes in that model and says, like, is that really the best way to do things in the 21st century?
It's more than just the best way. It's becoming actually a liability because, well, Guillen points out that the average 60-year-old can expect to live another 20-plus years.
Wow.
And many of those in good health. So that's almost a whole nother stage of life that we're not really accounting for in the traditional model.
Yeah, it's like we're saying, okay, your life is basically over.
Right.
But you've got decades, potentially, of, vitality and potential ahead of you. And the book doesn't stop there. It kind of goes on to address all kinds of other big societal shifts, things like evolving family structures.
Yeah.
The fact that, more babies are born to unmarried than married women in a lot of developed countries.
Right.
These aren't just, statistics. These are like, signals that the ground beneath our feet is shifting.
They're harbingers.
Yeah.
And what Guillen calls the sequential model of life is increasingly at odds with all these megatrends that he identifies.
Yeah.
So that rigid structure of you go to school, you get a job, you retire at 65, it just doesn't work.
It doesn't make sense anymore.
In a world where people are living longer, technology is changing so rapidly, and even family, the definition of family is changing.
Yeah, so let's unpack that a little bit. Like, what are the specific problems that this sequential model is causing?
Well, one of the things he points to is the pressure on teenagers to choose a career path before they've even had a chance to really figure out who they are, what they're interested in. And he calls this the culture of perfectionism, and it creates huge anxiety for young people.
I remember that so vividly.
Yeah.
Like, being in high school and feeling like, oh my God, I have to figure out what I'm going to do with the rest of my life.
And it's like you're choosing your entire menu based on like a couple of appetizers.
Yeah. And it's not just young people, right? I mean, this rigid model affects people throughout their lives.
Absolutely. Think about the impact on women.
Yeah.
Who, in the traditional model, it assumes this linear path. But often women are faced with this difficult choice of, do I pursue a career or do I start a family, because the timelines just don't add up.
They don't.
According to the sequential model.
Yeah. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got people who are, being forced into retirement when they're still healthy and capable.
Yeah.
The book actually gives this great example of Yuichiro Miura, who climbed Mount Everest at 80.
At 80?
I mean, come on.
That's incredible.
It just shows you that, age isn't the barrier that we used to think it was.
And it's a reminder that we're clinging to these systems that define people by their chronological age rather than their abilities or aspirations.
Yeah.
And that's where this idea of perennials comes in.
Okay, so tell me about these perennials. Who are they and how are they kind of pushing back against these old systems?
So Guillen defines perennials as people who constantly evolve, learn, and adapt. Throughout their lives, he compares them to perennial plants.
Oh, okay.
The ones that keep growing and blossoming no matter the season. So they're not bound by these age-based stereotypes.
Okay.
They embrace lifelong learning. They're open to new experiences. They're really the embodiment of the mindset that you need
to thrive
in this rapidly changing world.
So it's not just about, rebelling against traditional timelines. It's about adopting a different approach to life.
Yeah.
One that values growth and adaptability over conformity.
Exactly.
And rigidity.
And it's interesting because the book talks about how a lot of these assumptions that we have about, generational differences are kind of being challenged.
Okay.
He points to the study of American high school seniors that shows that work values have actually evolved gradually over time, not in these sudden shifts that, we often hear about, oh, the millennials are this way, the boomers are this way.
You hear that all the time.
It's actually much more nuanced than that.
It's so interesting how even marketing is starting to catch up to this idea. Like brands are realizing that people don't suddenly stop being interested in things just because they reach a certain age.
Absolutely. And the book talks about this shift towards what he calls ageless marketing.
Okay.
Where brands are recognizing that consumers have all kinds of different needs and desires across age groups.
Yeah, like look at the rise of grandfluencers.
Yeah.
I mean, these are older people who are killing it.
Absolutely.
On social media.
Proving that you can be fashionable, tech-savvy, and influential at any age.
Yeah, people like Batty Winkle and Gamer Grandma come to mind.
Exactly. They're not just defying stereotypes, they're redefining what's possible.
Yeah, it's inspiring to see. But so how does this perennial mindset, how does this translate to areas like education and work?
Right.
Which are still, pretty entrenched in that sequential model.
Well, Guillen argues that we need a pretty fundamental shift in how we think about both education and work. So education should be less about memorizing facts and more about fostering critical thinking, adaptability and problem-solving skills, the skills that you need to thrive in a world that's constantly changing.
And that makes a lot of sense because, in a world where information is readily available,
at our fingertips,
the ability to think critically and to adapt to new situations is so much more valuable
than just memorizing facts.
Yeah. So it's not just about, tweaking the existing system. It's about fundamentally rethinking it to embrace this more fluid and adaptable way of being.
Exactly. And that's really where I think the book starts to get interesting because it's not just about, individuals adapting to a longer lifespan. It's about looking at these larger societal challenges and saying, how do we need to change the way that our institutions and our systems work to accommodate this new reality?
And that's something that we're going to delve into in the next part of our deep dive.
Absolutely.
We'll be looking at the economic implications of a post-generational society.
Yes.
The challenges of shifting from that sequential to a perennial mindset.
Right.
And what a truly perennial future might look like.
Sounds good.
So stay tuned. We left off talking about, this need for a pretty fundamental shift in how we think about work and education.
Right.
In a world that's increasingly populated by perennials.
Yeah.
And one area where this shift feels especially urgent, I think, is retirement.
Yes.
That traditional model of working for a certain number of years and then just abruptly stopping.
Yeah. This doesn't seem to fit anymore, does it?
It's interesting because retirement, as we know it, is actually a fairly recent invention.
Oh, really?
For most of human history.
Right.
People worked until they couldn't work anymore.
Yeah.
So this idea of, a leisure-filled retirement.
Like kicking back.
Yeah, it's really a 20th century construct.
Yeah, and it's starting to show its cracks.
Exactly.
And it's not just about people living longer either, right? It's about how they experience those later years.
Right.
The book actually highlights some of the potential downsides of traditional retirement, things like social isolation.
Yeah.
Loss of purpose.
Absolutely. There's more and more research showing that sudden shift from full-time work to, complete leisure can actually be detrimental to people's well-being.
It's like you're losing your routine, you're losing your social connections.
Exactly. You lose that sense of contributing to something larger than yourself. So how do we reimagine retirement then in a way that's more aligned with this perennial mindset?
Right.
What are some of the alternatives that Guillen proposes?
Well, one of the things he talks about is phased retirement.
Okay.
Where people gradually reduce their work hours over time.
Okay.
Rather than making this sudden break.
Yeah.
And this allows for a smoother transition.
Right.
It gives people more flexibility to find that right balance.
Between work and leisure.
Between work and leisure, yeah.
I like that idea. I mean, it kind of acknowledges that retirement isn't
one size fits all.
One size fits all.
It allows people to tailor their transition
to their own needs and preferences.
To their own needs and preferences, exactly.
And it could also potentially address some of those economic concerns.
Right.
We hear about all the time about an aging population.
Right. Because if people are working longer,
even in a reduced capacity,
they're still contributing to the economy.
Right.
Which takes some of the strain off of, social security systems.
And speaking of economic concerns, the book also delves into, this whole issue of intergenerational wealth transfer.
Yeah.
Like the timing of inheritance is changing as people live longer.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. The book points out that the average age of inheriting in the UK now is somewhere in the 50s or 60s.
Wow.
So people are receiving inheritances much later in life.
Yeah, after they've already, made major financial decisions.
Exactly, like buying a home or paying for their kids' education.
Yeah, so it makes you wonder how this is going to affect financial planning for future generations.
Well, yeah, are people going to have to rethink,
a traditional approach?
The traditional approaches to saving and investing.
Yeah. It's not just about the timing either, right? It's about the size of those inheritances.
Right. The book suggests that the size of those inheritances might actually decrease.
Because people are living longer.
Because people are living longer and using more of their savings during their extended lifespan.
So it's like, are we creating a system where future generations are at a disadvantage?
Yeah. It raises some interesting questions.
Big time.
About, wealth inequality and intergenerational fairness.
Yeah. So it's not just about individuals adapting. It's about society as a whole grappling with these pretty significant challenges.
Absolutely. And those challenges go beyond just the economic realm.
Right.
The book also explores the potential downsides of a perennial society.
Okay.
For example, there's a risk of exacerbating existing inequalities.
Oh, okay.
If certain groups are unable to adapt to the demands of, this rapidly changing world, they could get left behind.
So it's really important then that these benefits of a perennial society are accessible to everyone.
To everyone, not just those with privilege and resources.
Right.
And Guillen really stresses this. He talks about the need for policies that promote lifelong learning, that provide support for workers transitioning between careers, to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
In this changing economy.
In this changing economy, yeah.
So what would a truly perennial future look like then?
Well, the book kind of paints this picture of a society that values lifelong learning.
Okay.
Flexibility, adaptability, where age is no longer a barrier to pursuing new passions or starting businesses or contributing to the workforce.
It's an enticing vision, but getting there won't be easy, will it?
Of course not. Change is always challenging.
Right.
And I think one of the biggest hurdles will be overcoming ageism, which is so deeply ingrained
in our society.
In our society, yeah.
It's about shifting our mindset from viewing aging as this process of decline to seeing it as a journey of, continued growth and evolution.
And that shift requires more than just individual effort.
Right.
It requires systemic changes in how we structure our institutions and our policies.
So we need workplaces that value experience and wisdom as much as, youthful energy and innovation.
Exactly. And we need educational systems that cater to learners of all ages and stages.
Right. And I think most importantly, we need to foster a culture that celebrates the contributions of people at every stage of life.
Absolutely. Yeah. Building a truly perennial society is a collective endeavor.
Yeah.
It requires a shift in attitudes, a willingness to embrace new ways of thinking,
and a commitment to creating a future that is both dynamic and inclusive. This has been a really thought-provoking conversation.
Yes.
We've covered a lot of ground.
A lot of ground.
But there's still so much more to explore.
Right.
So in part 3, we're going to delve into some specific examples of how this perennial mindset is being put into practice.
Okay.
In different areas of life, from education and work to marketing and technology.
Sounds good.
And we'll also touch upon some of those ethical and philosophical questions that come up as we kind of reimagine what aging and longevity mean.
In the 21st century.
In the 21st century. So stay tuned. We've spent the last 2 parts kind of digging into, the theory behind this whole perennial society idea.
Right.
But I'm really curious to see how it's actually playing out. Like, what are some real world examples of how organizations and individuals are embracing this stuff?
Well, one area where we're seeing a lot of action is in education.
Oh, no.
The rise of these online learning platforms like Coursera and edX is making education so much more accessible and flexible than ever before.
Right.
You can find courses on pretty much any subject you can imagine.
It's amazing.
And they're designed for learners of all ages and stages. So it's not about, fitting your learning into this, rigid time frame anymore. It's about integrating it into your life whenever and wherever it makes sense for you.
It's almost like that prediction in the book about online credentials becoming more widely accepted than traditional degrees is starting to come true.
Exactly. We're seeing this real shift away from that emphasis on formal education to a more fluid model where the skills and knowledge you acquire through all sorts of different avenues are valued.
And it's not just at the individual level, right? I mean, companies are starting to get on board with this too.
Absolutely.
They're realizing that investing in their employees' lifelong learning is good business.
It makes sense.
So they're offering, better training programs, creating opportunities for employees to develop new skills, to adapt to, the changing demands of the workplace.
Yeah.
It's like a win-win. Employees feel valued, empowered to grow.
And companies get a more adaptable and engaged workforce.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The book mentions this really cool example of reverse mentoring.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard of this?
Yeah, where younger employees are mentoring
The older ones.
the older employees
On new technologies and social media and stuff.
I love that idea.
It's so cool. It flips that traditional model on its head.
Right.
It's like saying, hey, we all have something to teach each other.
Exactly.
Regardless of age or experience.
Yeah.
So what about the actual physical workplace itself? Are there companies that are designing more perennial-friendly environments?
Definitely. I mean, we're seeing this huge trend towards flexible work arrangements. Okay. Things like remote work options, flexible hours.
Compressed work weeks.
Yeah, all of that giving people more control over their time and their schedules.
Which makes a lot of sense because, people have lives outside of work.
Exactly.
They have families, they have other commitments.
And when you give people that flexibility, they're happier.
Right.
They're more productive.
More engaged.
Exactly.
And the book talks about how, ultimately this benefits both the employees and the employers.
Absolutely.
Everybody wins.
Yeah.
And some companies are taking it even further.
Okay.
They're creating these intergenerational teams.
Interesting.
Bringing together workers of different ages and backgrounds.
I know that.
To really tap into those diverse perspectives and experiences.
It just makes sense. You get more creative problem solving,
right,
better decision making, a richer work environment overall.
It's amazing to see how these seemingly small changes can have such a big impact on the way we work and live. It's not just about tweaking the system.
Right.
It's about creating something entirely new.
It is.
And this isn't just happening in the traditional workplace either.
Oh, right.
We're seeing this perennial mindset play out in things like entrepreneurship.
Okay.
With more and more people choosing to start businesses later in life.
Interesting.
Like they're saying, retirement, no thanks. I've got another chapter to write.
Yeah.
These seniorpreneurs,
yeah, I love that.
as they're being called.
It's a great term.
Are really challenging that stereotype of, entrepreneurship being a young person's game.
Absolutely.
They're bringing so much to the table.
Years of experience.
Expertise, a different perspective.
A long-term vision.
All of this really paints this hopeful picture of a future where age is less of a defining factor in how we live, learn, work.
Right.
It's about seeing aging as a process of continued growth and evolution.
Not decline.
Not decline.
Yeah.
But like with any big societal shift, there are ethical and philosophical questions.
Of course.
That we need to grapple with.
Right.
And the Perennials touches upon some of these.
Okay.
Particularly around, the potential of technology and medicine.
Right.
To further extend lifespans.
It's a fascinating topic.
It is.
I mean, if we're already struggling to adapt to people living, into their 80s and 90s, what happens when 100 becomes the new 80?
Right. How do we ensure that these advancements benefit everyone equitably?
Yeah.
And how do we deal with the philosophical implications of potentially extending human life indefinitely?
Right. Are we playing God?
Big questions.
Yeah.
That require, thoughtful consideration and open dialogue.
Absolutely.
As we navigate this uncharted territory.
This is new for all of us.
It is. It's a reminder that, embracing a perennial mindset isn't just about adapting to a longer lifespan.
Right.
It's about reevaluating our values, our priorities.
What does it even mean to be human?
Exactly, the meaning we give to life itself. I think the Perennials isn't just a blueprint for a new societal model.
No.
It's a call to really think deeply about what matters.
In a world
where age and time are becoming more and more fluid.
Yeah.
It's an invitation to embrace this mindset of continuous learning and growth and adaptation.
For our own benefit.
And for the benefit of society as a whole.
Absolutely.
This deep dive has honestly given me so much to think about.
Me too.
Both in terms of my own life and, these larger societal shifts that are happening.
It's been a fascinating journey.
It has.
And I hope it sparked some curiosity for our listeners as well.
I hope so. If you had to sum up the Perennials in one key takeaway, what would it be?
I think it's the idea that we're not bound by age.
Yes.
We're all capable of growth and change and contribution.
Throughout our lives.
Yeah. And embracing that truth, I think, is the key to unlocking a future.
That's both fulfilling and sustainable.
That's it.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive.
Okay.
We hope you've enjoyed exploring the world of the Perennials with us.
Yeah.
And that it's inspired you to rethink the possibilities of life in the 21st century.